The millionaire's autistic son didn't speak, until a simple maid walked through that door. She had no degree, no technique, no prestige, only a heart willing to listen. While everyone else doubted, the boy began to speak. And the father began to feel. But when the love between them crossed social barriers, the real scandal began. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing, Louisa took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. She adjusted her curly hair, pulled back in a simple bun, and smoothed the worn dress she wore for interviews. The imposing gate of the mansion in Bel Air, a prestigious neighborhood in Los Angeles, seemed to intimidate her with its grandeur. At 26, she already carried the weight of responsibilities that many would only know decades later. Ever since her father left when she was 15, she had taken on the role of provider for the household, caring for her mother who suffered from a degenerative disease. Be polite, but not submissive. Show competence, but not arrogance. She repeated to herself the advice of Mrs. Zuleika, the neighbor who had recommended her for the position. According to her, the salary was exceptionally good, but there was a catch that had driven away previous candidates, the owner's son. A boy who, in the whispered words of the neighbor, lived in his own world. The metallic voice of the intercom startled her. Yes? Good morning, I'm Louisa Campos. I have an interview scheduled with Mr. Henry Morrison. The gate slid silently open. Louisa walked through the impeccably manicured garden, where every flower seemed positioned with mathematical precision. Nothing there seemed spontaneous or welcoming, despite the beauty. At the mansion's door, she was greeted by a middle-aged woman with a severe expression and impeccable posture, who introduced herself as Olga, the housekeeper. Mr. Morrison is on a conference call. Please wait in the office. Louisa followed Olga into the mansion. The marble floor shone like a mirror, reflecting the crystal chandeliers. Paintings by renowned artists adorned the high walls. It was a picture-perfect house, flawless and cold. This is a house of rules, Miss Campos, Olga said as they walked. Mr. Morrison values order and discretion above all else. Louisa nodded, absorbing every detail. There was beauty in that place, but also a palpable sadness, as if the luxury was trying to compensate for some fundamental absence. In the office, she waited for almost half an hour, observing the bookshelves filled with books that seemed never to have been opened. Corporate photos showed Henry Morrison at gala events, always with the same calculated smile. In only one photograph, half hidden among business awards, there was an image of a small boy with large brown eyes and a distant expression. The door suddenly opened. Henry Morrison was exactly as he appeared in business magazines, tall, impeccably dressed, with graying hair at his temples that gave him an air of authority. At 42, he was one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the tech sector in the United States. Miss Campos, I apologize for making you wait. His voice was deep and controlled. There was no real regret there, just formality. Let's get down to business. The interview was direct and cold. Henry explained that he needed someone who could not only take care of the house, but primarily of his 7-year-old son, Michael. My son has autism, he said, with a clinical tone, as if talking about a business project. He hasn't spoken in 3 years since... He hesitated for the first time. Since his mother left us. Louisa perceived the pain behind the professional facade. It wasn't just his wife's departure, which she would later discover was because she abandoned her son upon realizing he wouldn't be normal, but the emotional distance between father and son that weighed heavily in that environment. We've had 4 caregivers in the last 6 months. None managed to establish any connection with Michael. He looked at her directly. What are your qualifications for dealing with a special needs child? Louisa had no diplomas or certificates to present. What she had was life and the experience of someone who learned to care from an early age. Mr. Morrison, I don't have specific training in special education, but I took care of my younger brother while our mother worked, and today I care for her as she is ill. I've learned that everyone has their own time and their own language. Sometimes you just need to discover how to listen. She expected him to dismiss her immediately, but something in her words seemed to strike Henry. After a moment of silence, he asked her to accompany him. I want you to meet Michael. That will be the real interview. They went up to the 2nd floor of the mansion. As they approached the boys' room, Louisa noticed a change in the atmosphere. The walls were more colourful. There were framed drawings, although all monochromatic, in shades of blue. The bedroom door was decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars. "Michael," Henry called, tapping lightly. "We have a visitor." Silence. They entered a spacious, perfectly organized room. There were books aligned by size and color, toy cars arranged in precise rows, and a desk with papers and pencils organized at right angles. It was a child's room, but it lacked the natural chaos of childhood. At first glance it seemed empty, but Louisa soon noticed an almost imperceptible movement behind a blue armchair. Two curious eyes watched her. "Michael is shy today," Henry said with a sigh that denoted more frustration than understanding. "I'll go back to the office to finish some emails. Olga will show you the rest of the house." And just like that, Henry left, leaving Louisa alone with a boy she barely knew. The housekeeper also withdrew, saying she would return in a few minutes, and Louisa felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She didn't try to force an approach. She sat on the floor at a respectful distance from the armchair and began to hum softly a song her grandmother had taught her when she was little. A song about a brave little paper boat sailing the world. As she sang, she looked more closely at the room. There was an open notebook on the desk, with repetitive drawings of the same blue car. Dozens of pages with the same drawing, each identical to the previous one, with meticulous precision. After a few minutes, Louisa saw little Michael move. He didn't look directly at her, but approached the desk and picked up the drawing notebook. With precise gestures, he tore out a page and pushed it towards Louisa, still keeping his distance. It was his way of communicating. Louisa took the drawing and examined it with genuine interest. "This car is very special to you, isn't it?" Michael didn't answer, but watched her reaction to his drawing intently. "You know, I think this car has a story. It looks strong, but also a little lonely. Maybe it's looking for a racetrack where it can show how fast it is." It was almost imperceptible, but Louisa noticed a small sparkle in the boy's eyes. A spark of interest. She continued, inventing a story about the blue car that was afraid to race because it thought it wasn't good enough. Michael moved a little closer, still not looking directly at her, but clearly absorbing every word. His small fingers repeatedly touched the edge of the desk, in a constant rhythm. "Maybe he needs someone who believes in him," Louisa suggested softly. "Someone to help him discover how brave he is." The silence continued, but there was a change in the quality of that silence. It was no longer a barrier, but a space of possibilities. When Olga returned to show her the rest of the house, Louisa carefully stood up. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Michael. I hope we can talk more about your blue car." As she left the room, Louisa was sure that this would not be her last visit. There was something about that boy, about that house with beautiful walls and windows closed to affection, that called to her. A connection she couldn't explain, but felt in her heart. Henry was waiting for her in the entrance hall, checking messages on his state-of-the-art cell phone. "So, Miss Campos, still interested in the job after meeting Michael?" Louisa looked into his eyes, seeing beyond the mask of a successful businessman, seeing the lost father who didn't know how to reach his own son. "Yes, Mr. Morrison. When can I start?" 2 weeks had passed since Louisa started working at the Morrison mansion. The routine was strict, starting at 6 in the morning. When she prepared Michael's breakfast, always the same, pancakes in perfect circles, arranged so they didn't touch on the plate, with a small portion of honey on the side, never on top. Henry was rarely present in the mornings. He left before his son woke up and returned when he was already asleep. Communication between them was mainly through messages left with Olga, or more recently with Louisa. "How did Michael behave today? Did he eat well? Did he do the exercises recommended by the therapist?" Technical questions that never touched on the essential. On that Thursday morning, Louisa decided to change the routine. Instead of cleaning the library after breakfast, she took Michael to the garden. The boy hesitated at first, clutching his blue car that he never left behind, but eventually followed her with cautious steps. "We're going for a different kind of walk today. Michael," she said naturally without demanding a response, "I think your car will like to see new places." The garden was immense, but Michael never went beyond the limits of the small wooden deck near the kitchen door. Louisa noticed that he avoided the grass, walking only on the stone paths. Respecting his boundaries, She didn't insist that he step on the grass, but sat on the edge of the path and began to tell stories about the plants. Look at these daisies, Michael. Did you know they turn their faces to follow the sun during the day? It's like they're dancing a slow dance that only ends when night falls. As she spoke, Louisa carefully picked a daisy and placed it near him without forcing him to take it. To her surprise, after a few minutes, Michael touched the flower with his fingertips, an almost imperceptible gesture, but loaded with meaning. Over the weeks, Louisa wove an invisible web of trust. During daily cleanings, she created stories for the objects in the house. The living room clock became a mustachioed gentleman who told time so as not to feel lonely. The books in the library were travelers who had visited many places before resting on the shelves. Michael began to follow her around the house, always keeping some distance, but clearly interested in the narratives she created. Olga observed this with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "You talk too much to the boy," the housekeeper commented one afternoon. "The doctor said he needs routine and predictability, not fanciful stories." "Maybe he needs both," Louisa replied, as she carefully folded Michael's clothes. "Routine to feel safe, and stories to know there's a world beyond routines." The first big change happened on a rainy Sunday. Henry was surprisingly home, locked in his office with urgent matters. Louisa had prepared lunch and called Michael, who seemed more agitated than usual. When she tried to serve the food, the boy began to wave his hands frantically, a behavior she already recognized as a sign of anxiety. "What's wrong, Michael?" "Is something different?" He pointed to the plate, then to the window, then to his own chest in a rapid sequence that Louisa couldn't decipher. His breathing was accelerated, about to turn into a crisis. Louisa knelt down to his level, without touching him, but close enough for their eyes to meet. Should he choose to look at her, "It's okay, Michael. We'll figure out what's happening together. Breathe slowly with me." She began to breathe in an exaggeratedly calm way, an exercise she had learned by observing the boy's therapy sessions. After a few minutes, he calmed down a bit. Louisa then noticed the plate wasn't the usual one. Olga had washed Michael's favorite plate, the one with blue edges, and Louisa, without realizing it, had served the food on a common plate. "It's the plate, isn't it? You prefer your special plate?" Michael didn't respond verbally, but his posture relaxed slightly, confirming her theory. "I'll get your plate. It must be in the kitchen. Wait here." When she returned with the correct plate, she found Michael drawing frantically in his notebook. It wasn't the usual blue car, but something that looked like a sequence of figures, a cloud, a plate, and something resembling a heart. Louisa transferred the food to the correct plate and sat beside him. "Thank you for helping me understand, Michael. Sometimes we forget that the small things are the most important, don't we?" To her astonishment, without looking directly at her, Michael murmured, "The car also needs the right path." His voice was soft, almost a whisper, but they were clear and articulated words. Louisa felt her heart race, but maintained external calm, knowing that any exaggerated reaction could frighten him. "That's true," she replied naturally. "Everyone has their own special path." At that moment, she hadn't realized that Henry was standing at the dining room door, paralyzed by the surprise of hearing his son's voice for the first time in 3 years. For the rest of the day, Michael did not speak again, but something had changed. The crack in the wall of silence had been made. That night, after settling Michael in bed, Louisa was called to Henry's office. He seemed different, his usual rigid posture giving way to an almost palpable vulnerability. "What happened today?" he asked, his eyes fixed on her. "How did you manage? How did he speak?" Louisa explained about the plate incident, about how she had tried to understand the world from Michael's perspective in recent days. "I didn't do anything extraordinary, Mr. Morrison. I just tried to listen to what he was already saying, even without words." Henry stood up, walked to the window, and watched the rain that was still falling. 3 different specialists told me he might never speak again, that the trauma of abandonment combined with autism had created an insurmountable psychological barrier. His voice trembled slightly. "And you, without any degree, achieved in a few weeks what no one else could in years." "It wasn't me," Louisa replied sincerely. "It was him. Michael was ready, he just needed to feel safe enough to try." Henry turned, and Louisa noticed his eyes welling up, though no tear dared to fall. What are you doing differently? Tell me exactly so I can replicate it. The question caught her by surprise. How to explain that there was no technique or method, just authentic presence? It's not something you can list in steps, Mr. Morrison. It's about truly being present. About seeing Michael as he is, not as we'd like him to be. Henry sighed, running a hand through his perfectly aligned hair in a rare gesture of disarray. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to connect with him. It was the first sincere confession Louisa had heard from him, and her heart tightened at the vulnerability of this man who seemed to have everything, but not what truly mattered. I can show you, if you like, she offered hesitantly. Tomorrow is Saturday. Perhaps you could take a few hours to be with us in the garden. There was a moment of tense silence, as if Henry was calculating the emotional costs of that proposal. I have a video conference at 9, but I can cancel. Yes, I'll be available. The next day, a sunny Saturday, Louisa prepared a small picnic in the garden. Michael was visibly surprised to see his father appear in jeans and a t-shirt, so different from his usual suits. Initially, it was uncomfortable. Henry tried to interact with mechanical phrases, direct questions that Michael ignored, focusing only on aligning his toy cars on the blanket spread on the grass. Let him lead the way, Louisa suggested gently. Observe what he does and enter his world without trying to bring him into ours. Gradually, Henry began to relax. When Michael lined up the cars in precise rows, his father picked one up and carefully placed it in the same direction as the others. Michael glanced at the car adjusted by his father, then at Henry, and then did something surprising. He pushed a red car towards him. It was an invitation. Henry looked at Louisa, who nodded encouragingly. He then picked up the car and gently pushed it back to Michael, who aligned it with the others, before pushing it back to his father again. A simple game was being born. Father and son, communicating without words, finding a common language in small gestures. As the sun began to set, Michael picked up his favorite blue car and held it for a long moment. Then, to Henry's astonishment, he extended the toy to Louisa. He likes you, Michael said, his voice even clearer than the day before. Henry froze, his eyes fixed on his son, who had now spoken his second sentence in years. And I like him very much, Louisa replied, accepting the car with the solemnity the moment demanded. And I like you very much too, Michael. That afternoon transformed something fundamental in the house. Silence began to give way to new possibilities. As they walked back to the mansion, Henry lightly touched Louisa's arm. Thank you, he said simply. But in his eyes there was more than gratitude. There was a recognition of the daily miracle she was helping to build, brick by brick, word by word. And there was also something new, a sparkle that Louisa preferred not to name at that moment, but that made her heart beat a little faster. The winter months gave way to spring, and with the new season, the Morrison mansion seemed to bloom from within. The curtains, once permanently closed, now let in natural light. Meals previously served in silence gained brief but meaningful conversations. Michael still spoke little, carefully choosing when to use his words, as if each one were a precious jewel not to be wasted. The most surprising transformation, however, was Henry. The businessman who once left at dawn and returned at night now made a point of having breakfast with his son. He developed the habit of calling during the day, not to give instructions to Olga, but to speak directly with Michael, even if only for 2 minutes. And more importantly, he began to come home in time to participate in dinner and the bedtime ritual. On one of those nights, as Louisa organized Michael's room after putting him to bed, Henry appeared at the door. He asked me to read the story today, he commented, with a mixture of pride and surprise in his voice. He chose that dinosaur book you bought. Louisa smiled, carefully folding a blue sweatshirt. That's a great sign. He's expanding his circle of trust. Thanks to you, Henry said, approaching to help her organize some toys. You know, I hired the best specialists in the country, read dozens of books on autism, but I never truly understood how to connect with my own son. He paused, holding a small plastic dinosaur. How do you make it seem so natural? Perhaps because I'm not trying to fix anything, Louisa replied simply. Michael isn't a problem to be solved. He's a complete person, with a different way of seeing and feeling the world. Henry looked at her for a long moment, as if seeing beyond the employee, seeing the woman with an open heart and intuitive wisdom. "Would you have dinner with me tomorrow? After Michael is asleep?" The question caught Louisa off guard. She felt her face flush. Would that be appropriate? Just dinner between two friends. Henry chose the word carefully. "To thank you for everything you've done. And also, I confess, because I'd like to get to know you better." Louisa hesitated. Something was growing between them, something delicate and indefinable that she had been trying to ignore. How could there be a future between the housekeeper from South Central and the millionaire businessman from Bel Air? Worlds separated not only by miles, but by insurmountable social chasms. "I don't know if that's a good idea, Mr. Morrison." "Henry," he corrected softly. "Please, when we're like this, talking about Michael, about important things, I'd like to just be Henry to you." The request, made with disarming sincerity, melted her defenses. "All right, Henry, I accept dinner." The next day, Louisa was as nervous as a teenager. After putting Michael to bed, she changed out of her uniform into a simple blue dress, the only non-work item she had brought. She looked at herself in the mirror of the small maid's room and sighed. Perhaps she was making a mistake, confusing gratitude with something deeper. To her surprise, Henry was not waiting for her in the formal dining room, but on the small back veranda, where he had set up a simple table with candles and a bottle of wine. He had even made the food himself, a lasagna that, he confessed at the outset, was the only recipe he knew how to make, learned from his Italian grandmother. "It must be awful," he said, serving her a portion. "I haven't cooked in years." The food was far from perfect, with too much cheese in some parts and too little in others, but there was something special about seeing this man, always so controlled, allow himself to be imperfect. "It's delicious," she replied sincerely. "It has the most important ingredient, which would be—" "Care," Louisa replied, holding his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. The conversation flowed with surprising ease. They talked about their childhoods, his privileged but solitary, an only child of absent parents, her simple but rich in affection, until her father's departure. They talked about dreams. He confessed that despite all his business success, he felt an emptiness that no professional achievement filled. She revealed that she had always wanted to be a teacher, but had to abandon her studies to work. "You'd be an incredible teacher," Henry said, pouring more wine. "In fact, you already are. Michael has learned more from you in months than from all the tutors I've hired. It's different. I don't have methods or theories. I just listen. And maybe that's exactly what he needs. What we all need, in fact." When dessert, store-bought ice cream, as Henry admitted his culinary skill was limited to lasagna, was served, the businessman made an unexpected proposal. "I want you to consider a change in your position. No longer as a housekeeper, but as Michael's official tutor, with a compatible salary and benefits. You could finish your pedagogy degree. I would pay for your studies." Louisa put down her spoon, surprised. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's the right thing to do." "You have a gift, Louisa. It would be selfish of me to keep you cleaning floors when you could be developing your potential. And Michael deserves someone with your sensitivity guiding his development." The offer was tempting, but Louisa felt an inexplicable discomfort. What if it doesn't work out? What if I accept, start studying, build expectations, and then— She hesitated. And then you realize I'm not as special as you think, that any trained educator could do the same or better. And I would lose not just an opportunity, but— She didn't finish, but the thought was there. She would lose her closeness with Michael. And with him. Henry reached for her hand across the table. "That won't happen." His touch was warm, secure, and sent an electric current through Louisa's arm. She gently withdrew her hand. "I need to think." "It's an important decision." He respected her withdrawal. "Of course. No rush." The next morning, as she helped Michael choose his clothes, always a delicate negotiation, as only certain textures were acceptable to his sensitive skin, Louisa noticed Olga observing her with a different expression. "The boss seems very pleased with your work," the housekeeper commented, with a tone that suggested more than the words said. "Michael is progressing well," Louisa replied, avoiding the true meaning of the observation. "Be careful, girl," Olga said, lowering her voice. "It's not the first time I've seen this story. The simple girl who charms the rich boss, it usually ends in tears. The comment hit Louisa like a slap. It was exactly what she feared, being seen as an opportunist, someone trying to take advantage of the millionaire boss. It's nothing like that. Olga. Perhaps not on your part, the housekeeper conceded. But men like Mr. Morrison, they live in another world. What might seem like the beginning of something genuine to you might just be a temporary distraction for him. Olga's words hammered in Louisa's head all day. That night, when Henry arrived home early again and suggested the three of them have dinner together in the informal dining room, she felt uncomfortable, aware of Olga's discreet glances as she served the table. Michael, oblivious to the emotional complexities of adults, was having a good day. He had built an elaborate track for his cars and wanted to show it to both of them. "Dad, look, I made it myself," he said, with evident pride in his still economical use of words. Henry's face lit up. It was the first time Michael had called him Dad since he regained his speech. He knelt beside his son, examining every detail of the construction with genuine interest. "It's incredible, son. You're very talented." Louisa watched the scene with a heavy heart. There was so much love there, so much potential for healing and connection. How could she allow her own fears and insecurities to interfere with this process? During dinner, Henry announced a surprise. "Next weekend, I thought we could go to the beach. All three of us." Michael has never seen the ocean. The boy's eyes widened. The prospect of such a big change in routine would normally be frightening, but Louisa's presence seemed to give him enough security to consider the adventure. "Are there shells?" "And crabs?" he asked, showing knowledge clearly acquired from his books. "Lots of shells," Henry assured him. "We can collect the prettiest ones." Michael looked at Louisa as if seeking confirmation that it would be safe. "Are you coming too?" "If you want me to," she replied softly. "I do," Michael said with unusual conviction. Then, looking at his father and then at Louisa, he added, "The three of us. Like a family." The innocent comment fell like a silent bomb on the table. Henry looked at Louisa, who felt her face burn. How could she explain to a child the complex social and emotional barriers that separated that improvised family? Later, after settling Michael, Louisa was about to retire to her room when Henry called her to the office. "About his comment at dinner," he began, visibly uncomfortable. "Children say what they think," Louisa replied, trying to ease the tension. "Don't worry. I'm not worried," Henry said, approaching her. "In fact, I've been thinking a lot about it. About us." Louisa felt her heart race. "There is no us, Mr. Henry. I am an employee of the house." "What if I told you I want you to be more than that?" The confession, made in a low but firm voice, left her speechless. A part of her wanted to believe, wanted to surrender to what was growing between them. Another part, the one that knew the harshness of the real world, sounded alarm bells. People would talk. "They'd say I'm with you for money. And since when do I care what people say?" he retorted, taking a step towards her. "Maybe you don't care now," she replied, subtly backing away. "But one day you might, and I couldn't bear to see doubt in your eyes, the suspicion that maybe they were right." The determination on his face wavered, giving way to understanding. "That's not how I see you, Louisa. Never was." "Even so," she insisted, fighting her own desire, "I think it's better we keep our relationship professional, for Michael's sake. He's already been through too much abandonment." Henry nodded slowly, respecting her decision, though his eyes said the conversation wasn't over. "Are we still going to the beach this weekend?" "Yes," she replied, knowing she couldn't disappoint Michael. "But as his tutor, not as—" "I understand," Henry interrupted. "Good night, Louisa." That night in her small room, Louisa couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, reliving every moment of the conversation, every exchanged glance. She wondered if she was making the right choice or if out of fear. She was giving up something precious that had barely begun. In the silent mansion, in another room, Henry also lay awake contemplating how blind he had been for so long, both regarding his son and his own feelings. And how ironically, now that he finally saw clearly, he faced an obstacle that all his money and power could not remove, the genuine fear of a woman who feared not being accepted into his world. A fear that he knew deep down was not entirely unfounded. The trip to Malibu Beach unfolded in an atmosphere of contained anticipation. In the luxurious SUV driven by Henry himself, Michael gradually observed the changing landscape. From the congested metropolis to more open roads, finally culminating in the sight of the sea that so fascinated him in his books. Louisa sat beside him in the back seat, pointing out curiosities in the scenery while trying to ignore Henry's occasional glances in the rearview mirror. The Morrison beach house was cozier than the mansion in Los Angeles, with large glass windows facing the sea and a less formal decor in shades of blue and white. It was in a secluded area, with private access to the beach, a privilege Louisa had never experienced. "You'll stay in the guest room," Henry explained, carrying the bags. "It's the one with the best sea view." "You didn't have to. Any room would be—" "Please," he gently interrupted her. "Let me do this." Michael explored the house with curiosity, touching different textures, mentally cataloguing each new space. For Louisa, it was fascinating to see how he processed unfamiliar environments, with initial caution followed by methodical exploration. "Big sea," he commented, looking out the living room window. "Noisy." "It's the sound of the waves," Louisa explained. "They're always moving like a big breath." After settling in, they decided to go down to the beach. Michael, cautious with the unstable sand under his feet, clung to Louisa's hand. To her surprise, he extended his other hand to his father, creating a human chain that walked slowly towards the waves. The first contact with the sea was magical. Michael, who normally avoided new sensations, let the water touch his feet, retreating with a laugh when the cold foam reached him. It was a sound Louisa and Henry rarely heard, the genuine, uncontrolled laughter of a child simply happy. "I like this," he declared, pulling them both closer to the water. They spent the afternoon collecting shells, observing small crabs, and building sandcastles. At one point, Henry took a photo of the three of them with his phone, Michael in the center, surrounded by the adults, all with spontaneous smiles. Seeing the image, Louisa felt a pang in her chest. They really looked like a family. During dinner, prepared by Louisa in the spacious kitchen overlooking the ocean, Michael surprised them both with an unexpected question. "Why aren't you two boyfriend and girlfriend?" Henry's fork stopped mid-air, while Louisa almost dropped her glass of water. The direct, unfiltered question, typical of Michael, caught them both off guard. "Michael, that's a very personal question," Louisa explained, trying to stay calm. "But you like each other." "I see it." Henry cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Adult relationships are complicated, son." "Why?" The simplicity of the question made the answer even harder. "Because adults are sometimes afraid," Louisa replied, surprising herself with her honesty. "Afraid of getting hurt, of it not working out. Like my car that was afraid of the track." The analogy to the story she herself had invented months ago left her speechless. Henry took the opportunity to intervene. "Bath time, champ. Tomorrow we'll wake up early to see the sunrise." While Henry took Michael to get ready for bed, a new routine he had taken on with growing confidence, Louisa stood on the veranda, watching the moon reflected in the dark waters. Michael's question echoed in her mind, along with her own answer. Fear. Was that really what was stopping her? Later, when the house was silent and Michael was fast asleep, Henry found her still on the veranda, now wrapped in a light shawl to protect herself from the sea breeze. He fell asleep quickly, he commented, joining her on the large outdoor sofa. "I think the sea tired him out." "It was a perfect day for him," Louisa agreed, full of new experiences. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled only by the rhythmic sound of the waves. About his question, Henry finally began. "Children are observant," she said, trying to ease the tension, and perceptive. Henry turned to face her. "Louisa, I know you have fears, and I understand all of them, but I think we're wasting something precious because of fears that might never materialize." She stared at her own hands, clasped in her lap. "It's not that simple. Henry, our lives are completely different." "They were," he corrected, "before you came into my house, into my life. I just existed. I worked, accumulated, did what was expected of me. I didn't truly live." He moved a little closer. "You taught me to see my own son. How could I not fall in love with you?" The word fall in love hung between them like a confession that could not be unsaid. Louisa felt her heart quicken. "You say that now, but what about when the novelty wears off? When you introduce me to your friends, your partners? When they ask where we met? I'll tell them the truth." he replied without hesitation. That you came into my house to work and ended up saving my family. That I'm grateful every day for that. And your ex-wife, what will she say when she finds out her son is being raised by the housekeeper? The mention of his ex-wife made Henry's expression harden. Amanda relinquished any right to comment on Michael's life when she abandoned him because he wasn't the perfect son she wanted to show off to her. Friends? The bitter tone surprised Louisa. In all these months, Henry rarely mentioned his ex-wife. I'm sorry, she murmured. I didn't mean to bring up painful memories. Henry sighed, running a hand through his hair. Don't be. It's part of my story of who I am. He paused. That's why I closed myself off so much. Not just from the shock of seeing Michael regress after she left, but from my own inability to trust again. And now? Louisa asked almost in a whisper. Now? He reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. Now I want to try. If you want to, too. His touch was warm, secure, like an anchor amidst the storm of doubts. For a moment, Louisa allowed herself to imagine a future where she didn't have to choose between caring for Michael and loving Henry, where she could have both without fear or guilt. What if it doesn't work out? That would terribly affect Michael. What if it does work out? Henry's voice was soft but firm. Wouldn't we be giving him what he most desires? A real family, united by love, not just by obligation. Before Louisa could answer, Henry leaned in and gently kissed her lips. It was a brief kiss, almost a question. When he pulled away, his eyes sought permission, understanding, reciprocity. Louisa felt her defenses crumble. All the rational arguments against that relationship seemed pale in the face of what she felt. With a sigh that carried both surrender and relief, she leaned in and returned the kiss, this time deeper, more sincere. When they finally separated, Henry smiled, a smile different from any other she had seen, free from his usual tension, almost youthful in its joy. I think Michael would be pleased with this development, he commented, still holding her hand. Louisa laughed, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. He'd probably say, I knew it. The rest of the weekend passed in a bubble of cautious happiness. During the day, it was the three of them, exploring the beach, visiting the small local aquarium, a suggestion from Louisa that enchanted Michael, playing board games when a passing rain kept them indoors. At night, after Michael fell asleep, it was just the two of them, talking about the past, interrupted dreams, overcome fears, discovering each other with the curiosity of someone finding an unexpected treasure. On the last morning, as they packed their bags to return to Los Angeles, Henry surprised Louisa with a small box. What is this? She asked, hesitant. Open it. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a shell-shaped pendant. Simple, elegant, nothing ostentatious. To remember our first weekend together, he explained. Our new beginning. Louisa let him put the necklace around her neck, feeling the light weight of the pendant as a symbol of promise. Michael, who was watching from the doorway, approached with a curious expression. Pretty, he commented, touching the pendant with his fingertips. Then, looking from one to the other, he added, You are happy. It wasn't a question, but a statement, said with the quiet certainty of someone seeing something obvious. We are, Henry confirmed, pulling his son into a hug that soon included Louisa. The return to Los Angeles, however, brought back the complexities of reality. The first to notice the change was Olga, whose sharp eyes immediately caught Louisa's new necklace and the different closeness between her and the boss. I hope you know what you're stepping into. Girl? The housekeeper commented when they were alone in the kitchen. Her tone was not malicious but concerned. Men like Mr. Morrison live in a different world than ours. People can fall in love regardless of social class, Olga, Louisa replied, more firmly than she felt. Fall in love, yes. Stay, not always, the older woman sighed. I just don't want to see you hurt. Or worse, see that boy suffer if this ends badly. The comment hit Louisa where it hurt most, her love for Michael and the fear of harming him. But before she could answer, they were interrupted by the kitchen phone. It was Henry, inviting Louisa to a formal dinner the following weekend. A friend is turning 40, he explained. It would be a good opportunity to introduce you to some important people in my life. Louisa's stomach tied itself in knots. It was one thing to live their nascent relationship in the protected environment of the house. It was quite another to face the outside world, Henry's social circle, the inevitable questions and glances. "Are you sure?" she asked, insecure. "Isn't it too soon?" "Not for me," he replied with conviction. "But I understand if you prefer to wait." Louisa thought of her mother's advice, who always said that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something is more important than fear. "I'll need a dress," she finally said, making Henry smile on the other end of the line. The dress in question was chosen 2 days later, during a surprising afternoon of shopping. Henry insisted on accompanying her, also bringing Michael, transforming what could have been a moment of anxiety into a small family adventure. In the sophisticated store, where Louisa would never have entered alone, Michael proved to be a surprisingly perceptive critic, rejecting overly elaborate dresses with a simple, "It doesn't suit you," and finally approving a teal model, elegant in its simplicity. "It looks like the sea," the boy commented, touching the soft fabric. "Beautiful like you." The comment, made with Michael's typical disarming sincerity, brought tears to Louisa's eyes. She knelt down and hugged the boy, who returned the gesture, something that months earlier would have been unthinkable. Henry watched the scene with an emotion he did not try to hide. When Louisa stood up, he held her face in his hands and kissed her softly, without caring about the glances of the salespeople. "He's right," he murmured. "You are beautiful." On the Saturday of the dinner, as she got ready in the small bathroom of her room, Louisa felt the weight of her insecurities returning. What if it was a disaster? What if everyone saw that she didn't belong in that world? What if Henry realized it too? A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Michael holding something in his hands. "For you," he said, extending a drawing. "For good luck." On the paper, with the meticulous precision that characterized his work, was a portrait of the three of them, Henry, Michael, and her, holding hands. Above them a shining sun, and around them what appeared to be small shells. "Our family at the beach," he explained with a small smile. In that moment, looking at the drawing, and at the boy who had once lived isolated in his silent world, Louisa understood that some risks are worth taking. That fear could not be greater than love. "Thank you, my dear," she said, kissing his forehead. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received." When Henry finally saw her ready, in the teal dress, the shell necklace, and her curly hair loose for the first time since he had met her, he was momentarily speechless. "You look stunning," he finally managed to say. That night, as she entered the elegant restaurant arm-in-arm with Henry, Louisa decided that, regardless of what the future held, she would live that moment fully, not as the housekeeper promoted to girlfriend, but as the woman she was, and strong, dignified, and for the first time in a long time, truly happy. The Ivy restaurant glowed with the discreet elegance that characterized Los Angeles high society. Soft lights, ambient music played by a live string quartet, waiters who moved like attentive shadows. Upon entering arm-in-arm with Henry, Louisa felt dozens of eyes turned towards them, some curious, others evaluative, some openly surprised. Henry guided her with the confidence of someone navigating familiar territory, occasionally whispering, "That's Paul Miller, owner of the country's largest construction company," or "The lady in red is Judge Marina Adams, very influential in the court." These were pieces of information meant to help, but which only increased Louisa's nervousness. What would she talk about with such important people? The birthday boy, George Anderson, greeted them with a warm smile that broadened upon seeing Louisa. "So you're the famous Louisa." Henry talks about nothing else. He kissed her hand with a theatrical gesture. The woman who did the impossible softened this workaholic's heart and reconnected father and son. "Have you considered running for president? You seem to have extraordinary diplomatic talents." The joke, made with genuine sympathy, helped Louisa relax a little. George, she discovered, had been Henry's friend since college, one of the few who treated him without reverence or self-interest. A renowned architect, he had an irreverent way that contrasted with the formal setting. "How do you feel entering the lion's den?" he discreetly asked Louisa, when Henry moved away to greet other acquaintances. "Is it that obvious?" She returned with a nervous smile. "To those who know how to observe," George sipped his champagne glass. "Don't be intimidated. Half these people are neck-deep in debt just to keep up appearances, and the other half are deeply unhappy despite the money." You have something they envy, and what would that be? Authenticity. He raised his glass in a silent toast. And you achieved what none of the most determined socialites managed, genuinely capturing the heart of the most coveted and shielded bachelor in this circle. Before she could answer, Louisa was rescued by Henry, who led her to the main table. During the sophisticated 6-course dinner, she tried to remember the etiquette lessons she had nervously watched on YouTube in the previous days. Which fork to use first? Does the napkin go on the lap or next to the plate? When to toast? Despite the initial tension, Louisa found that she could maintain interesting conversations. Years of caring for people had given her a unique ability to genuinely listen, something rare in that environment where many spoke only to be heard. A magazine editor was particularly charmed when she asked insightful questions about his work. A pediatrician found in her an attentive interlocutor about the challenges of children with special needs. Henry watched her with evident pride, occasionally touching her hand under the table or whispering affectionate comments that made her smile. It was as if he wanted to make his admiration for her clear to everyone. Not everything, however, went perfectly. During dessert, Louisa noticed a group of elegant women observing her and whispering, with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. One of them, blonde and impeccably dressed, eventually approached. "Henry, long time no see," the woman exclaimed, completely ignoring Louisa. "Not since the Montero's New Year's party, right?" "Hello, Christina," he replied politely but without enthusiasm. "This is Louisa Campos, my girlfriend." The label girlfriend, used publicly for the first time, made Louisa's heart race, mixing pride and apprehension. "Charmed," Christina said, with a smile that did not hide her critical assessment. "And how did you two meet? I don't remember seeing her at our social gatherings." The question Louisa feared most had finally arrived. She felt her body tense, but before she could elaborate some vague answer, Henry intervened. "Louisa came into my life to care for Michael, and she ended up caring for me too, teaching me the real meaning of family." The direct honesty caught both Louisa and Christina by surprise. The woman blinked a few times, trying to process. "Oh, how interesting," she finally replied. "I've always admired people who do social work." Henry narrowed his eyes, catching the malicious insinuation. "It's not social work, Christina. It's love, something you might not easily recognize." The woman recoiled, visibly disconcerted, and walked away with a murmured excuse. Louisa squeezed Henry's hand under the table, grateful for his defense, but also concerned about the tension of the moment. "I'm sorry about that," he murmured. "It's not your fault," Louisa replied. "And thank you for telling the truth, for not being ashamed of how we met." "I would never be ashamed of that." He gently kissed her fingers. "It was the happiest day of my life, even if I didn't know it at the time." On the way back home, as the hired driver for the evening drove the car through the illuminated city, Louisa rested her head on Henry's shoulder, reflecting on the night. It had been a mixture of affirmation and discomfort, belonging and strangeness. She was entering a world that had never been hers, for the love of a man and a child who had become her heart. "What are you thinking about?" Henry asked, stroking her hair. "How unpredictable life is," she replied. "A year ago I was cleaning different houses every day to support my mother. Now I'm coming back from dinner at the Ivy, dating one of the most important men in Los Angeles. Bothered by the change? It's not discomfort, it's vertigo, as if I'm between two worlds, not fully belonging to either." Henry hugged her tighter. "You belong to our world, Louisa. The one we created together, you, me, and Michael. The rest is circumstance, not essence." The words were beautiful, comforting. But that night, as she prepared for bed, still in the maid's room, her choice to maintain appearances out of respect for Michael, Louisa couldn't completely shake off the doubts. The glances, the whispers, Christina's thinly veiled malicious comment, were they just the beginning? The next morning, a sunny Sunday, Michael burst into her room, something rare for a child normally so contained. "Louisa, come see what Dad made." Following the boy to the kitchen, she found Henry, the powerful businessman, CEO of one of the country's largest tech companies, wearing an apron and trying to make pancakes. The kitchen was a chaos of flour, broken eggs, and a substance that was supposed to be pancake batter, spread on various utensils. "Help?" he asked with an embarrassed smile when he saw her. The contrast between the elegant Henry of the previous night and this clumsy man in the kitchen was so great that Louisa couldn't help but laugh. A laugh that released the accumulated tension, that brought back the feeling of belonging. This was the man she loved, not the businessman in his impeccable suit, but the father trying to make pancakes for his son on a Sunday morning. "Let me help," she offered, rolling up her sleeves. "Michael, do you want to be my kitchen assistant?" The three worked together, transforming the chaos into an impromptu breakfast. When they finally sat down to eat the pancakes, some perfect, some deformed, Michael looked at them both with a serious expression. "Are you two getting married?" The direct question, without warning, made Louisa choke on her juice. Henry also seemed surprised, but recovered faster. "We'd like to be together, yes," he replied cautiously. "But marriage is a big step that needs to be thought through carefully." Michael processed the information with his usual concentrated expression. "If you get married, Louisa will live here forever?" "That's the idea," Henry confirmed, looking at Louisa with an expression that mixed affection and a silent question. "Good," Michael declared, returning to eat his pancake as if he had solved an important matter. Later, as they washed dishes together, an activity Henry had never done before meeting Louisa, he brought up the subject again. "He's right, you know." About the marriage, Louisa felt her heart race. "Henry, we've barely started dating. We don't need to rush. I'm not proposing marriage. Yet," he added with a smile. "I just want you to know that's where I'm headed. A future together, the three of us." His sincerity touched her deeply, but it also intensified her doubts. Could it really work? An ex-housekeeper married to one of the richest men in the city. How would Michael's life be in this unconventional arrangement? And her mother, who depended on her financially? Where would she fit into this new configuration? That afternoon, while Henry took Michael to the park, another new habit that had transformed the family dynamic, Louisa took the opportunity to visit her mother in the small apartment in South Central. Mrs. Clara, still limited by the illness that mostly confined her to bed, greeted her with her usual loving smile. "You're different," the older woman commented, observing her daughter. "There's a sparkle in your eyes I haven't seen in years." Louisa told her mother about the development of her relationship with Henry, about the dinner the night before, about the possibilities and fears growing in her heart. "I'm scared, Mom," she confessed, holding the woman's wrinkled hands. "Scared of giving myself completely, and then discovering it was just an impossible dream." Mrs. Clara, with the simple wisdom of someone who had lived through many storms, squeezed her daughter's hands. "Fear only has the power we give it, my daughter. If what you feel is real, nothing else matters. What if it doesn't work out? What if he gets tired of me? What if the people around us make everything impossible? Then you hold your head high and move forward as you always have." The woman smiled. "But don't give up before you try, just for fear of falling." Upon returning to the mansion in the late afternoon, Louisa found Henry and Michael in the garden, planting flowers, another surprising activity for the always busy businessman. Seeing her, Michael ran towards her, covered in dirt but radiant. "We planted daisies, like the one you showed me." The gesture, so simple and so profound, brought tears to Louisa's eyes. Henry approached, also with dirt stains on his hands and face, never looking so handsome in her eyes. "We thought the garden needed more life," he explained, hugging her. "Like you brought to this house." That night, as they put Michael to sleep together, the boy asked Louisa to tell the story of the blue car, the first story she had invented for him, months ago, and which had somehow become part of their personal mythology. "Is the car still scared?" Michael asked, already half asleep. Louisa looked at Henry, who watched the scene with evident love in his eyes, and then back at the boy who had become so special in her life. "No," she replied softly. "He discovered he's strong enough for any track, as long as he has people who believe in him." Later, when they were alone in the living room, Henry surprised her with a proposal. "How about we move your mother closer? There's a house available in the community, just 5 minutes from here, with a full-time nurse to care for her." The offer, made naturally, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, left Louisa speechless. It was a solution to one of her biggest concerns, how to reconcile caring for her mother with her new life. "That would be perfect," she finally managed to say. "But it's too much, Henry. I can't accept something like that." "Why not?" He took her hands. What's mine is yours, Louisa. Now and always. People will say I'm with you for money, she argued, vocalizing one of her greatest fears. That's why a woman like me would be with a man like you. Henry sighed, squeezing her hands tighter. Let them talk. We know the truth. He looked into her eyes intently. We're building a family, Louisa. You, me, Michael, and now your mother too. That's what matters. His conviction was almost contagious. That night, for the first time, Louisa did not return to the maid's room. She slept in Henry's arms, allowing herself to dream of a future where all her worlds could somehow coexist in harmony. But fate, as always, had its own plans. The next morning, as they had breakfast, Henry's cell phone rang. The short call transformed his expression. When he hung up, he seemed disturbed. What's wrong? Louisa asked, concerned. Amanda is coming back, he replied, referring to his ex-wife. She's coming to Los Angeles, and she wants to see Michael. The news of Amanda's return fell like a bomb on the fragile happiness they had built. In the following days, Louisa watched Henry transform. His relaxed posture giving way to old tension, his easy smile becoming rare. Michael, though unaware of his mother's return, seemed to pick up on the change in the atmosphere, becoming more withdrawn, more attached to his routines. Why is she coming back now? Louisa asked the night before the scheduled meeting. They were on the veranda after putting Michael to sleep. According to her, regret, therapy, a desire for reconnection. Henry repeatedly ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Louisa now recognized as a sign of extreme anxiety. But the timing is suspicious. Just now that we're doing well, that Michael is progressing. Do you think she found out about us? Henry shrugged. Los Angeles is a small city when it comes to high society gossip, especially after dinner at the Ivy. The fear Louisa had kept under control began to grow. Amanda was not just Henry's ex-wife. She was Michael's biological mother, a woman from the same social class, someone who, in the eyes of society, made more sense by his side than an ex-housekeeper. Do you think she wants to come back? To you? The question hung in the air, heavy as lead. Henry turned to face her. It doesn't matter what she wants. It ended a long time ago. But there was a shadow in his eyes, something Louisa couldn't quite decipher. Fear, doubt, resentment? The next day, Henry went alone to meet Amanda at a neutral cafe away from the house and Michael. The wait during those hours was agonizing for Louisa. Every minute seemed an eternity, as she tried to distract Michael with games and activities, hiding her own anxiety. When Henry finally returned, his face was serious but composed. How was it? Louisa asked as soon as they had a moment alone. She's different, he replied thoughtfully. Calmer. She said she'd had intensive therapy for the past 2 years, that she realized the mistake she made by abandoning Michael when he needed her most. And what does she want now? Reconnection. Regular visits. Eventually shared custody. The words hit Louisa like a punch. Shared custody meant Michael divided between 2 homes, 2 lives. Where would she fit into this new arrangement? What did you say? That we need to prioritize Michael's well-being above all else. That any reapproach would have to be gradual, with psychological support. Henry held her hands. And I made it clear that you are a fundamental part of his life now. Of our lives. The affirmation should have reassured her, but something in Henry's expression, a subtle hesitation, a gaze that didn't quite meet hers, fueled her insecurities. In the following days, Amanda became a growing presence. First, a supervised meeting with Michael at the psychologist's office. Then a short visit to the mansion, where the boy greeted her with caution, but without open rejection. With each interaction, Louisa watched Michael slowly reconnecting with the maternal figure who had abandoned him, not with the total trust he showed with her, but with cautious curiosity. Amanda was everything Louisa was not: elegant, sophisticated, familiar with Henry's world. Despite their troubled past, she shared memories, mutual friends, cultural references with him. In her presence, Louisa felt more aware than ever of her simple origins, her incomplete education, the stark differences between their worlds. One evening, after another visit from Amanda, Louisa found Michael in his room, drawing with unusual intensity. "What are you doing, darling?" she asked, sitting beside him. Michael pushed the drawing towards her. It was a portrait of the mansion with 4 figures in front: Henry, Michael, Louisa, and Amanda. "It's our house," he explained simply. The inclusion of Amanda in the family portrait was like a dagger to Louisa's heart. She couldn't blame the boy. It was natural for him to want his biological mother in his life. But where did that leave her? "It's a very beautiful,